Officer Jake Reynolds cruised down a quiet city street, his patrol car's lights flashing as he spotted a sleek black sedan rolling to a stop at a red light. The driver, a black woman in a crisp navy blue suit, glanced in her rearview mirror but remained calm as he pulled in behind her. Jake didn't need a reason. He rarely did. He had been on the force long enough to know which types to watch for. He flipped on his siren. The woman sighed and pulled over. As Jake approached, hand resting on his holster, he tapped the driver's window aggressively. License and registration. The woman arched a brow but complied, reaching into her glove compartment slowly. Is there a problem, officer? Jake's eyes narrowed. He didn't like her tone. It wasn't deferential, not afraid enough. Step out of the vehicle. She blinked. Excuse me? I said step out of the car, now. The woman inhaled deeply but didn't argue. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped onto the pavement, her heels clicking against the asphalt. Jake's gaze swept over her. She looked too polished, too composed. He didn't like it. You're interfering with an investigation, he snapped. An investigation into what? She asked, arms still at her sides. Jake smirked. I asked the questions here. Turn around and put your hands on the car. Her jaw tightened. On what grounds? Jake's patience ran thin. In a swift motion, he shoved her shoulder. Hard. She stumbled. Turn. Around. That was the... The woman steadied herself, brushing off her sleeve as she slowly turned to face Officer Jake Reynolds. There was no fear in her eyes, only measured control. That irritated him even more. I said hands on the car, Jake barked, stepping closer, his hand hovering near his baton. I heard you, she replied, her voice calm. But I asked you a question. On what grounds are you detaining me? Jake scoffed. Suspicious behavior. Failure to comply. The woman folded her arms. Failure to comply with what? You haven't stated a lawful reason for this stop. Jake's jaw clenched. He wasn't used to pushback, especially not from a black woman who should have known better than to question him. His temper flared. You think you're smart, huh? He sneered, taking a step closer. People like you always think you can talk your way out of trouble. People like me? She echoed, arching an eyebrow. Jake ignored the question. His patience had worn thin. That's it, he snapped. Turn around, hands behind your back. He reached for his cuffs. The woman remained still. Are you sure you want to do this? Her voice was steady, but something about the way she said it made Jake hesitate for just a fraction of a second. But pride and rage overrode whatever warning bells might have been ringing in his head. Last chance, he growled. Do it, or I'll make you. Then, without warning, he kicked her legs out from under her. She gasped as she stumbled forward, catching herself against the car. A split second later, Jake felt the weight of his mistake sink in. Because as soon as she straightened up, everything shifted. She turned to face him fully, and then, with chilling authority, she said the words that stopped his world cold. Officer Reynolds, assault. Officer Jake Reynolds' breath hitched as the words rang in his ears. Officer Reynolds, you're under arrest. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. Then, his pride and rage roared back to life. The hell I am, he spat, stepping forward aggressively. You don't get to. Before he could finish, the woman moved with practiced precision. In one swift motion, she grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back, and forced him to his knees. Jake yelped in pain, his free hand clawing at the pavement to keep from falling face first. What the? Stay down, the woman ordered. Her voice was sharp now, her composure unwavering. Jake struggled, but she tightened her grip. You assaulted a civilian without cause, used excessive force, and failed to conduct a lawful stop, she said coolly. That makes you a threat, and as per department policy, I'm detaining you for misconduct and battery. Jake's mind raced. How the hell was this happening? How was she stronger, faster? How did she even know department policy like that? He turned his head to glare at her, his face twisting with fury. You think you're going to get away with this? The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a badge. She held it up just long enough for him to see the name engraved on it. Captain Maya Carter. Jake's blood ran cold. She wasn't just another civilian. She wasn't even just another cop. She was his boss. The big reveal. Jake's body went rigid as he read the name on the badge. Captain Maya Carter? His boss, his black boss. His mind scrambled for an excuse, for some way to flip the situation back in his favor. But it was too late. The power had already shifted. Maya leaned in slightly, her voice dangerously calm. You assaulted your commanding officer, Reynolds. That's not just misconduct, it's a career ending mistake. Jake's mouth went dry. His heart pounded against his ribs. This is a joke, he growled, trying to yank his arm free. You? Maya twisted his wrist slightly, cutting him off with a sharp jolt of pain. Resisting now, too? That's another charge. The realization set in like a punch to the gut. The woman he had kicked, the one he had treated like just another powerless black civilian, had all the power right now. Bystanders had gathered, some recording on their phones. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the scene as backup officers arrived, their faces frozen in shock at the sight of their captain restraining one of their own. Jake's pride screamed at him to fight back, to regain control, but there was no control left to take. He had played his hand, and he had lock and denial. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps as the weight of his mistake pressed down on him, literally and figuratively. The pavement felt rough beneath his knees, but nothing compared to the humiliation burning through his body. This is insane, he stammered. You can't do this. Maya remained unmoved. I already did. Jake shook his head, his mind scrambling for an escape. You set me up? You? Set you up? Maya let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You pulled me over. You escalated this. You attacked me. Jake's jaw clenched. He searched for words, for some justification. You thought I was just another black woman you could push around, Maya cut in, her voice sharp. That's the problem, Officer Reynolds. You act first, then justify later. Jake's head swiveled toward the approaching officers, his fellow cops, his peers, but their expressions told him everything. Some looked stunned, others wary. A few had their hands resting near their belts, unsure if they should intervene. But no one spoke up for him. For the first time, Jake realized he was alone. His mouth went dry. Captain, this is a misunderstanding. You kicked me to the ground, Maya said evenly, in front of witnesses, on camera. Jake turned, his eyes darting to the crowd, the bystanders holding up their phones, recording every second of his downfall. The flashing lights of police cars made the whole thing feel surreal. I didn't know who you were, he blurted out, as if that made it better. Maya's eyes burned into his. Tables turned. Jake's breathing was ragged, his mind still scrambling for control, but it was useless. The shift had already happened. He was no longer the one in power. Maya tightened her grip just enough to keep him from making any sudden moves. You've spent years believing your badge made you untouchable, she said, her voice calm but firm. That ends today. Jake's eyes darted to the other officers. Somebody say something, he barked. She can't do this. The officers hesitated. Some looked at Maya. Others looked at each other, but no one rushed to his defense. Maya finally spoke again, her tone authoritative. Officer Reynolds is under arrest for assaulting a commanding officer, using excessive force, and violating department policy. She turned to the nearest officers. Secure his weapon and read him his rights. Jake's stomach dropped. What the hell? You're really gonna do this? He spat at his fellow officers. One of them, Officer Patel, stepped forward. His face was tense as he unbuckled Jake's holster and carefully removed his gun. You have the right to remain silent, Patel began, his voice tight. Jake thrashed once. You're kidding me. Maya pushed his arm up just enough to make him stop struggling. Keep resisting, and I'll add another charge. Jake gritted his teeth, seething. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The street was silent, except for the hum of police radios and the murmur of bystanders still recording. He could already imagine the headlines. Racist cop arrested by black female captain. His career, his reputation, shattered in seconds. And arrives. The distant wail of additional sirens filled the air as more patrol cars pulled up to the scene. Officers spilled out, some gripping their belts, others exchanging uneasy glances as they took in the sight before them. One of their own, on his knees, in cuffs, with the captain standing over him. Jake's eyes darted toward the new arrivals, desperation flaring in his chest. These were his colleagues, his friends. Surely one of them would step in. Sergeant Miller, he called out to a burly officer stepping out of a squad car. You're really gonna let this happen? Sergeant Miller's face was unreadable as he walked up, scanning the scene. Captain Carter, he said, his voice measured, what's going on here? Maya didn't flinch. Officer Reynolds assaulted me during a traffic stop. He used excessive force, failed to conduct a lawful detainment, and is now in custody for misconduct and battery. Miller's gaze flickered between Maya and Jake, then to the bystanders still recording. He let out a slow breath. Anyone else witness this? Officer Patel stepped forward. I was here when she identified herself. He still attacked her. His voice was tense, like he knew the weight of what he was saying. Jake's stomach twisted. He turned to another officer. Jackson, someone he'd had beers with after shifts. Come on, man, Jake hissed. You know me. You really think I'd do this? Jackson hesitated, but then his jaw tightened. I've seen you do worse. Jake's breath caught. Miller exhaled and finally nodded. All right, he said. Let's get him in the car. Jake felt the last thread of his control snap. As officers pulled him to his feet and started leading him away, the crowd erupted into murmurs. Cameras stayed trained on him, flashing lights casting eerie shadows across his stunned face. He was no longer the one giving orders. He was the one being taken away. The footage had spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with clips of Officer Jake Reynolds being arrested by Captain Maya Carter. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly, replaying the moment he was forced to his knees, his face twisted in shock. The hashtags #Justice Served, Accountability in Blue, and Captain Carter trended worldwide. Jake sat in a holding cell at the precinct, his head in his hands as his phone, now confiscated, buzzed endlessly in an evidence bag. He could only imagine the texts, friends, family, reporters, probably even lawyers. His career wasn't just damaged, it was over. At the same time, Maya stood in front of a podium at a hastily arranged press conference, the city's police commissioner at her side. The cameras flashed as she addressed the nation. No officer is above the law, she stated firmly. Accountability is not optional, it is a requirement. Some in the crowd applauded, others remained skeptical, their questions sharp. Captain Carter, do you believe this is an isolated incident or part of a larger problem in the department? Maya didn't hesitate. We all know the answer to that, she said. And that's why change starts now. Back at the station, the days that followed were a whirlwind of reactions. The police department issued a formal statement confirming Officer Jake Reynolds had been placed on unpaid leave pending an internal investigation. But the court of public opinion had already made its judgment. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, some demanding deeper reforms within the department, others celebrating Maya Carter's actions as a victory for accountability. Signs reading, "No more corrupt cops," and "Justice in uniform" filled the streets. Jake, meanwhile, sat in his apartment, blinds drawn, ignoring the endless barrage of missed calls. His name was plastered across headlines, his face replayed on every news channel. Former colleagues avoided him. Friends distanced themselves. Even his union, usually quick to defend officers in controversial cases, had gone silent. He turned on the TV just in time to see Maya Carter again, this time in front of a disciplinary review board. She sat tall and composed, fielding questions about police conduct and the future of the department. This isn't about one bad officer, she said firmly. It's about making sure there aren't any more. Jake gritted his teeth and shut off the screen. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one in control. And he had no one to blame but him. Dust had begun to settle, but the impact of that night was far from over. Maya Carter sat in her office, stacks of reports in front of her, detailing the department's internal investigations. Officers were being retrained, policies were being reviewed, and for the first time in a long time, real change felt possible. A knock at her door made her look up. It was Sergeant Miller. "Captain," he said, stepping inside. "The city council approved the new accountability measures. Looks like your press conference got through to them." Maya exhaled, a small smile forming. Progress. Meanwhile, Jake Reynolds sat in a courtroom facing a judge. His lawyer whispered furiously in his ear, but he barely heard him. The weight of the cuffs around his wrists was nothing compared to the weight of his own actions. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "Officer Reynolds, you are hereby stripped of your badge and will stand trial for assault and misconduct." Jake swallowed hard. There would be no getting out of this. As he was led away, the cameras flashed once more, not as a figure of authority, but as a symbol of what happens when power is abused. Back at the precinct, Maya stood in front of a group of new recruits, her voice strong and clear. "Wearing this badge means protecting everyone, not just the people who look like you, not just the ones who make you comfortable." Everyone. The recruits listened intently, knowing they were stepping into a department that would no longer turn a blind eye. For Maya, this wasn't just about one officer. It was about changing the system from the inside out. And she wasn't